What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Spirited. I'm really excited for this one because I have with me today Ewan McIlwraith, who's one of the judges for the World Whiskies Awards and also the owner of Robertsons of Pitlochry, which is an amazing whiskey shop in Scotland. So we're going to talk a little bit about what it's like to be a whiskey judge, how the process works, what it's like owning a legendary and well-known and respected whiskey shop, and how he got into whiskey. Ewan, can you hear me all right?
Absolutely, I can hear you loud and clear.
Beautiful. That's right. You're in Scotland right now, aren't you?
Yeah, indeed. Yes, yes.
Talk to us a little bit about how you got into whiskey.
Right. Well, it goes back quite a long time for me because my background's hotel management and working in the food and bev industry or food and bev specialising anyway. And I worked for a company called Stackers Hotels who don't exist anymore. They're bought by Hilton, and then the kind of brand disappeared. But my background was in particularly working in the food and bev side, so really focusing on wines initially, beers, and then obviously being Scottish, I like to dabble slightly in whiskey, and that's where I kind of just grew my interest and passion for whiskey from. Probably started as a student. That's probably being honest there. I'm sure many students had their first wings in whiskey at university. And it just came from there. And I've always worked in the industry. I've always worked in the hotel sector for a number of years, and I moved out into the food sector. And then I set up my own business, which was a specialty beer business in Scotland. And then eventually, through a very kind of twisty, meandering road, ended up buying Robertsons in 2013.
Wow. A lot of people don't know that the original blenders, like Johnny Walker, John Walker and Sons, John Walker was blending in a grocery. He wasn't this big manufacturing plant that it is nowadays with Diageo. It was, a small family operation, and they were just, blending, and you would buy from the cask, and they'd bottle it for you, or you'd buy a whole cask.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of people don't realize that, the old blenders, John Walker, I think maybe even John Dewar,
yeah.
They were real people, and they were, making these little homemade, not homemade so much, but, sort of homemade blends as compared to nowadays, in their shops, in their grocery stores, and selling them to their customers.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's the way it started. And Alan kind of followed that pattern because it was initially 100% groceries, and then he started. I think it'd be when he moved to the locations at the moment, he started buying and developing the whiskey range, and that's what I bought the business for, because he had built up a fantastic range both in Scotland and also internationally to a degree, certainly internationally European wise, with whiskies and knowledge, and just had a great reputation, which I could see there was a lot of mileage in, not the grocery side, but certainly in developing and taking the whiskey side further. And he had his own blended whiskey. He bottled a cask, or he bottled his own single malt, which is called Friar John Corr, after that well-respected friar from Lindores Abbey, which was the first legalised whiskey still in Scotland. So he the whole history is right through the business, and he just took it and he went with it. But I've taken it and continued, hopefully in expanding and developing his reputation.
I'm sure you have. I mean, Robertsons is world famous even over here in the States, and we don't know about a lot of stuff going on in Scotland. Here's a big question that I'm sure we're going to get asked. Yeah. Do you guys ship over here?
Well, interesting you ask that. I have just started exporting to Europe, and I have got some contacts, because we buy cask now. We do a lot of our own bottlings. It's quite a big part of the business now, and I'm just on the cusp of working on the sector. In America would be a fantastic market to get to. So we can ship single bottles, through UPS we use, who has worked quite well with, but we'll be looking for importers and distributors. So hopefully in maybe a couple of years' time we can get some of our bottlings across to you in large scale, which would be great.
Well, that sounds like it'd be a good bunch of fun. I need to try and get a hold. I'll have to see if I can get someone to mule me a bottle of yours from Scotland over here so I can try it.
Yeah. Oh,
So,
that's great.
oh, I believe it. So we've talked about, how you really got into whiskey. We talked about our Robertsons already, but here's what I really want to talk about. The meat of this, episode is being a judge for the World Whiskies Awards, because, the WWA is famous, as is the, San Francisco World Spirits Comp and the Wine and Spirits Wholesalers of America. Those are some well-respected spirits judging competitions. Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of people who I know who are judges, and I've never known anything about the judging process. And when we started talking, I'm like, that'd be a great thing to, talk about is let's demystify kind of the judging process so people understand, what you actually do. It's not, like, oh, we just walk in, we give it an arbitrary rating. No, there's actually a lot of work behind it, right?
Obviously, when you're judging, the first thing you do when you're presented with this, not necessarily, I do the same when I'm doing it for the first round. And it's the first round you do at home, then the second round goes forward to a competition where we actually sit down in the Scotch Malt Whisky Society rooms in Leith, and we sit down in there and we go through all the whiskies in one day. So we'll taste. So if you taste 51 at home, they go through to the second round. Plus, there's also the readers' competition. So readers of the magazine, there's a readers' panel. They get asked to select and choose some of their own whiskies. Again, they put those in. And the winners of that competition from the readers' panel, they all get amalgamated onto the final judging day. And last year, the final judging day was at the end of September. And I think from memory, and my memory was a bit hazy that day, we had 71 samples of whiskey we had to taste on the one day. So we tasted all of them in the morning, and then and it's all blended. You've just literally got a whole table in front of you.
I want to clarify something. When you're talking about tasting, I assume you're not drinking every sample, correct? You're, sipping it, but you're not like imbibing. You're either sipping and swishing and spitting.
You can, yeah, you can spit if you want. I don't, because I for me, the finish is very important on a whiskey. And if you spit, you don't necessarily get that finish. You don't get.
Fair enough, yeah.
So, but you're taking very, very small amounts of each whiskey, and I try them. I try them neat first, and then I try them with a drop of water. So it is quite a detailed process. But in between, we're drinking gallons of water and eating lots of oat cakes or crackers to try and keep our mouths clean.
Right.
To refresh the palates, because otherwise, if you don't, your palate would be exhausted. But also, the very first thing when I do when I sit in that room is I will open all the whiskies and I'll nose them all. And I'll put all the peated whiskies to the end. So I've taken them out of the equation to begin with. Right. So I know that I'll come on to those last. The next thing I do is I shake all the bottles. And I do that to gauge their alcohol content. There is a trick, when you shake a bottle, the length of time that the bubbles will stay on the surface indicates the alcohol content. So that longer they stay, the higher the alcohol. So can you go into that? Yeah, certainly. I don't have a sample here to show you, but what you do is you just take it and shake it and then stop, and the bubbles that form on the top, if they just disappear very quickly within a second or 2 seconds, it's lower alcohol. But if you shake it and they stay, then it's a lot higher alcohol. It's to do with the surface tension. So, a 55, 60% alcohol whiskey will probably stay 2 or 3 times longer than the bubbles on a 40%. So it's actually a really good way to filter out. So after I've moved the peated whiskies to the end, I'll then take the high strength whiskies and put them before the peated whiskies. So I'm starting off with lower alcohol whiskies, then going to the higher. That makes sense. But so once you've the first round of the Scottish Fields, as I say, it's done through home judging. We move on to the final judging in the day. The first round and the final judging morning is the yes, no, or maybe, and then the second round, anything that makes it through to the afternoon session, we're writing detailed tasting notes for again. So you've done 50 odd whiskies in the morning, and then the ones that go through you do again in the afternoon, writing the notes for. So it was 71 whiskies last year we tasted in one day.
So when you do the 51 odd or 71 odd in the morning, and you do your yes, no's, maybes, obviously, you know, the yeses, not every yes is going to come through. Obviously, it's got to be more like majority of yeses, right?
Yeah. So what happens is we're all sitting in the room, and for the Scottish Field, there's about, I think there's 7 judges last year, all owners of independent retail shops like myself. Plus we had Blair Bowman. I don't know if you've come across Blair Bowman, he has a book and he's a very, very well known. He was inventor actually of World Whiskey Day. He created the World Whiskey Day.
I bet him virtually. Yeah, we've talked on Facebook.
Yeah, nice, really nice guy, Blair as well. Very fantastic to speak to about whiskey. He's just so knowledgeable. But we're all in this room, and then so we've marked him, and then they literally just say to us, right, hands up for a yes. So it's quite interesting because we're all looking at our contemporaries in the room, thinking, right, if I get this wrong, I'm going to make a fool of myself here. And you see hands go up, and if you're the only hand up, you think, oh, not done that one right then. But it's really quite interesting that there's a huge. Last year we had no whiskies which were either 100% yes or 100% no. That was a much more varied result, which was very interesting. But, we all know what we like, and we can all judge good whiskies, but we all picked up different things in the day. So we're all looking at different key points that came out for us.
Now, with Scottish Field, are you just judging Scotch whiskies?
Yes, it is. It's purely Scottish for that one. So that's very much, but it's any, independent bottlings, private labelings, and distillery bottlings. But it's all just Scottish. Yeah. The one criteria is that it must have been available for sale the year before we judged it. So it's been in the market. There's no point in us judging a competition and it not being able to. Although it does happen that you tend to find that sometimes the winners are not available for sale because they've already sold through if they're small batch bottling.
Yeah, that happens. That's to be expected.
But that competition is very different and very differently run to the World Whiskey Awards. In the World Whiskey Awards, they have all the country heats. So every country has got their own heat, their own competition. So, for example, beginning of this year, I was involved in the judging in Edinburgh of all the Scottish single malts that were in the competition. So it's the Scottish heat. So first of all, we all judged the Scottish ones, and then the winners from that go down to the grand final, which was held down at the Caledonia Club in London. So we all go down the judges go down to the Caledonia Club, but you don't taste all the whiskies because there's literally about 300 or 400. And because it's every style of whiskey, every country that produces it, so we all get allocated. We all sit in tables. I think there's about 20 or 30 tables this year, and we're all sitting at a table, and we're all given particular whiskies to taste, and we're told which region it is. So this year I was on Ryes and Bourbons, actually, which is really interesting, and you then judge those particular categories that you're involved in. So you don't get to try everything, unfortunately. But it's a very good system. And again, they just mark it out of 5, very simple. Marks out of 5, and then they total all the marks up. But again, it's blind tasting, so we don't know what's in there. And it's actually very difficult we find out when the booklets come out at the end of it, but it's very difficult to know what you're tasting. We just know what the category is.
Sure. So how do you judge, out of 5, what is your, rubric, if you don't mind sharing with us? Yeah,
no, not at all. I mean, for me, I really enjoy a good finish on the whiskey. So I like the nose of it, and you're picking up a lot from the nose. And then the taste, I like a really rich mouthful. There's no particular style of whiskey which I like more or less, but I like a good one of each. I like a really good sherry finish or a really good bourbon finish. I like good flavors in there. If they're too watery or thin, or there's just elements coming through that I don't think balance, then I won't highly. But as I say, for me, it's the finish. So when you swallow it, you're just thinking about it. You're just feeling how it is, and you're just kind of getting enveloped, getting really engrossed in the flavour profile that's coming through from that. And that, for me, is where a good whiskey will score well. Everybody's different, but that's my sort of remit, is getting a good finish on it.
That's awesome. So without naming any names, of course, obviously we don't want to, upset any brands, would you describe to us, from your last judging, the flavors of the worst and best that you tried?
Yeah, that's going back a good few months now. I've had a few whiskeys since. There was. I did judge. It wasn't this year. It was the year before. I did taste a French whiskey, which really would probably described as almost weak tea. It just didn't have. It was really watery and just didn't have. It just didn't balance well. You didn't feel the flavors are working in harmony, and it just collided and really didn't give any satisfaction at all. So that was a very low mark for me. The highest, one of the best ones I tasted, and I'm being a bit patriotic here, but it was a Scottish whiskey, and it was in the Scottish Heats. And this particular one, it was a 21-year-old from a very well-known distillery that, can I give it away? Well, the gentleman that used to own it now owns Glenallachie, so let me put it that way. So I've now and it was a 21-year-old, and it was very heavily sherried, and it was absolutely outstanding. I mean, the flavours that came through, it was just, I didn't want that to finish. I could have just sat there with it in my mouth. I was just letting it roll over and finish. It was absolutely stunning.
On the topic of Glenallachie, I just joined a tasting that one of the local whiskey clubs did with Glenallachie, thanks to their importer, JBS Impex. And we were fortunate enough to try the 89 vintage 29-year-old.
Oh, right.
Oh, my God.
Really?
You didn't want a 21-year to finish? I didn't want a 29-year to finish. I looked at the bottle price last night and almost had a heart attack.
Yeah. It's funny.
Why must everything so good be so expensive?
I know. I've just come into Glenallachie really in the last 2 or 3 years, and I haven't got a vast repertoire, but even the stuff the whiskies that they've been bringing out in the last 2 or 3 years, I just think they're a really solid whiskey, great sellers in the shop as well. They've got a really good appeal. But I'd love to get into that, the kind of real top-end ones that they've produced over the last few decades.
I would like to be there if you need assistance when you get into that.
I'll let you know. Get that organised.
So how long have you been judging, by the way?
I've been judging Scottish Field 5 years, and the World Whiskey Awards, this was just my second year.
Wow.
Fairly new to the World Whiskey Awards.
So what do you like about World Whiskey versus Scottish Field and vice versa? And obviously, we just want to, have a better understanding of how things are run for, our viewers who may not know, because, I see an award and I'm like, okay, cool. It's an award. Respectfully, I don't give too much thought to it, especially because, with bourbons, at least, when, Jim Murray releases his whiskey Bible, for instance, the whiskey of the year goes from, usually affordable, like $30-40 a bottle to $400 or $500 a bottle.
Yeah.
Be the secondary market.
Absolutely.
That's not Jim Murray's. That's not Jim's fault.
No. And there is such a vast array of whiskies out there. Just the Scottish Field, I like them both because they are very different. The Scottish Field I like because it's all whiskies that we can generally get access to, although the winner last year was a private bottling for the whiskey shop, and it was a stunning whiskey. Mortlach, I think it was.
Oh.
It was really amazing.
Was it at cask?
Yes, it was just. It was absolutely stunning. But the time we got to taste it, one, we couldn't buy it because it was only sold in the whiskey shop, and also I think it all sold through. But it was a Hunter Lane.
One of my favorite whiskey bottlings ever. It was a Mortlach 25-year at cask strength, bottled for K&L Wines here in California.
Yeah.
I still have some of it, and I'm trying not to go through the bottle too fast. It's exactly what you want out of a Mortlach. It's nice, it's creamy, it's sweet, it's a little sherry, and it's just so meaty.
Yeah, yeah. Oh no, Mortlach. I mean, the sadly mourning the days that or we used to get the Flora and Fauna 16-year-old Mortlach. It was 16, 15. It was an absolute cracking whiskey. It really was. It was delicious. But yeah, I'm a fan of Mortlach, but a good Mortlach. Yeah, and particularly cask strength Mortlach. But the Scottish field is good because it is Scottish and it's whiskies potentially we can sell in the shop. So it's a great way of getting to kind of seeing it from both sides. But the World Whiskey Awards does open you up to whiskies that I never knew existed, from countries that I didn't realise were producing whiskey, and it's virtually every country in the world now is producing whiskey.
Yeah.
Varying degrees of success, but they're all getting there. You know, there's some amazing whiskies out there, and Scotland.
Avalon out of Taiwan is fantastic. Some of the entry-level Beam Suntory Japanese bottlings are really, really good. You know, I don't know where you fall on this, where you're saying on this, but the whiskeys, and I use that term loosely, the rice-based ones out of Japan, like Fukano and Oishi, they're tasty. You know, it's a well-known fact that I don't think they're whiskey. You know, in America, they're recognized as whiskey because in America, rice is a distillation grain allowed for whiskey. But in Japan, they're not whiskey, and they can't even be sold as shochu because they're too high proof. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, there are some, and I think Scotland has to be careful going forward. We're very, very tightly controlled by the Scots Whisky Association, you know, in terms of what we can do with our whiskey and aging it and everything else. And when I have a friend who used to own Strathearn Distillery, it's now been sold on, but he's very experimental and basically tries everything that he's not allowed to do, but he'll try it because he wants to. And he produced a spirit that he'd matured in chestnut. And oh my God, it was delicious. And you just think, but you can never sell it because in the UK there's no category for that to be pigeonholed into, so it can't be sold unless you came up with some new category. But so we've got to be careful because there's competition out there that are doing some very interesting whiskies that are younger, that haven't, you know, obviously aren't 3 years old. They don't need to be. The legislation locally allows that, but there's some fantastic whiskies. So
you know what, Ewan? You gave me the perfect segue for an interesting question I had. You mentioned the SWA and you mentioned local regulation. So recently, the TTB, the Tax and Trade Bureau for America, passed I don't want to say a law, but they updated their standards of identity for whiskey in general to state that any time spent in barrel counts towards age statement, which was interesting. And, you know, it got me thinking, is there a similar rule in Scotland, or does the SWA say only original barrel counts for age and anything past that is just finish?
Yeah, no, it's from the date it goes into cask to the date it comes out of cask in Scotland, and it can be transferred into different casks. So there's no change. It could go through. You know, a lot of whiskies in Scotland will start off in bourbon, transfer to sherry for finishing, but it's a total length in the UK for us. So because that's a lot to do with bourbon, isn't it? Did I read that? Is that what you're saying, that if it goes into a second cask for finishing, it doesn't count as aging, or there was...
Yeah, usually with bourbon, my understanding was that if it goes from, you know, well, first of all, you know, bourbon has to be done in a new charred oak container. You cannot finish bourbon. Otherwise, it's no longer legally bourbon. It's then bourbon with Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey or bourbon whiskey finished in sherry cask, tequila barrel, whatever.
Right.
But now, you know, what the TTB's done is they've updated those standards of identity so that now any time spent in barrel counts towards the age. So it's no longer, you know, 5 years with the 1-year finish. It's now 6 years old. Pardon me. There's something interesting that they did recently that I was like, well, I wonder how Scotland has that. That's something I've never really looked into, because I don't know if you've tried to read through the SWA standard identity for Scotch whiskey, but it's very confusing.
It is. It's I
had to look into that for my book when I was writing my book.
There's a lot of pages and a lot of detail. It's interesting because I've been, obviously with our own labelling, there's been a few changes recent to the labelling requirements and laws for Scotland, and trying to get a definition. Even different people interpret the SWA's legislation differently, so it's a minefield. It really is. It's very complicated. Almost too complicated, I think. It can be restrictive, but it certainly needs to be there to make sure that Scotch is kept as Scotch should be.
So we're starting to run out of time. Before we go, I have a couple more questions for you. The first one goes back to judging, and is, what would you like the consumer and the general public to know about whiskey and spirits judging that you think is important for them to know that we haven't already touched on?
Well, I think, when people in the industry get together, there's a lot of different, there's a lot of similarities in terms of what we're looking for and how we judge whiskies. But because whiskey is such an individual product, people have very individual ideas of what they like. Judging gives us the opportunity to sit down and talk to our fellow judges and learn, what they like about their whiskies. Even sitting at the table, people sitting at the table next to me, we talk about the whiskies once we've judged them, saying, how do you think? So it's very interesting just getting the fact that there is no right answer or wrong answer when judging a whiskey. It's very personal, but it's you'll have a majority in favour generally, like or dislike, but you won't get you'll never get an absolutely unison answer, which is very interesting, I think.
That's really interesting. You would expect at least once or twice to be, 100% on one way, 100% on the other way. But then again, like you said, that's the beauty of whiskey. Everyone's palate's different. Everyone likes something different.
Yeah.
And, one thing I would try and tell my guests when they're at my bar, it's that, what do you taste? They're like, well, what should I taste? I'm like, no. It's not what should you taste. It's what do you taste. There's no wrong answer.
Yeah, there isn't. When I write tasting notes to put in the back of my bottle of whiskey, I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm writing a taste what I taste. And just because I can taste, cinnamon or dark chocolate or milk chocolate, doesn't mean that the next person drinking it will taste that either. Yeah. It's so, so variable. So that's key to remember, is that there's not one right answer, and you can't tell somebody, no, you should be tasting this. It doesn't work that way.
No, it's very important. You really don't want to be telling anybody, this is what you should be tasting, because that kind of, curbs and crimps their individuality a little bit. And, it teaches them that, what everyone's been saying of, you taste what you taste, there's no wrong taste, no wrong answers. If you tell them, no, you should be tasting this, then, it kind of goes against what they've been taught and what myself and yourself and people in our industry have been preaching and teaching.
Absolutely.
My final question, if you had one bottle, you could have one bottle, any one bottle, but you only get one taste out of it, what would it be? It's got to be a bottle that has existed in the past. It can't be a made-up bottle. So anything that existed from today or before, what would it be? One bottle, one taste, and, a good 30 mils, 50 mils.
I would love to have been able to taste the 1926 bottling of Macallan that sold for £1.2 million.
Good answer.
I'd love to have tasted that. Because I don't know how good it would be. After 6 years in the cask, it could go either way, but I'd love to taste that. I can't afford it, but I'd love to taste it.
I'm in the same boat. Well, Ewan, thank you so much for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure to check out Robertsons of, Pitlochry or Pilchery?
Pitlochry.
I was way off.
Pitlochry, yeah, Robertsons of Pitlochry, yeah.
Folks, check out Robertsons of Pitlochry. Check out Ewan McIlwraith. Make sure to check out the World Whiskies Awards and Scottish Field. If you'd like this video, please share it with your friends and subscribe. Coming up is more fun stuff. Thanks, Ewan.
That's great. Thanks very much, Sam. All the best. Thank you.